By the time the wind carried her scent into town, folks already decided she was guilty of something. Dust rolled like tired breath across the town of Larkspur Bend. It wasn't much, just a crooked street stitched together by a saloon, a church, and the sheriff's office. But it was a place that loved its rules, even when they made no sense. She came walking from the east that evening, shawl torn, hair tangled with sagebrush. Some said she was a spirit from the mesas. Others swore they'd seen her mixing herbs with blood back near the riverbeds. No one knew her name. They just called her the Indian healer. No one hired her. No one spoke her name. But everyone watched her. The men spat when she passed. The women crossed themselves. The children whispered and pointed at the small pouch tied around her neck, filled with dried petals, ash, and something that looked too much like bone. Sheriff Miles Evis watched her too. From behind the window of his office, hat low, jaw clenched. His wife, Clara, had been coughing blood for a week now. No doctor from Carson Creek would come. They said whatever she had wasn't worth catching. The healer sat by the edge of town, near the dry well, grinding something with the back of a rock. A blackbird landed near her feet. She didn't shoo it away. She just said softly, "Death follows the kind ones first." That night, the church bell tolled though no one had died. Reverend Pike found her the next morning, her herbs scattered, a rope burned raw around her wrist. They said she'd been trying to hex the sheriff's wife. They said she'd been seen praying to the moon. And they said she'd been caught near the Evis Gate. No one waited to ask her truth. By sundown, a post was dug near the old corral. The crowd gathered like flies around Sorrow. Sheriff Evis didn't come out to stop them. He was kneeling beside Clara's bed, watching her chest stutter like a candle about to die. Outside, the healer was tied to the post. Dust caked her tears. Her hands were blistered from rope. The mayor's boy picked up a rock and threw it. It hit her cheek, drawing blood. She didn't flinch. Then, from the back of the crowd, a small voice broke through. "Papa, why's the sky crying?" It was the sheriff's son. The boy's hand was pointing upward. Clouds had gathered fast, dark, heavy, and strange. And with the first drop of rain, the healer whispered, "Even God knows when men lie." The rain didn't stop for 3 days. And on the 4th, Clara Evis stopped breathing. Some debts don't take coin. They take years off a man's sleep. Sheriff Miles Evis buried his wife in the red dirt behind the church, under the willow she used to sit beneath on Sundays. The grave was shallow. The ground had turned to stone from the rain. He didn't cry. He just kept digging. The townsfolk stood far back, hats lowered, whispering the same words they'd been whispering since dawn. She died cursed. The Indian woman brought the storm. Should have burned her when we had the chance. Miles heard it all, each word like grit between his teeth. That night, he found the healer shackled in the barn behind the sheriff's office. She sat cross-legged in the straw, wrists rubbed raw from the ropes, a bruise blooming along her jaw. A lantern swung above them, throwing her face into light and shadow. He stepped inside, boots heavy on the boards. "My wife's gone," he said. "I know," she replied. The sickness was in her lungs, not her spirit. "You waited too long." Her calm cut him like a blade. "You could have stopped it," he spat. "If you're what they say you are." She met his stare, eyes dark, steady, old. "I mend what I can, Sheriff. I can't cure hate." He slammed the lantern down, and it flickered low. He meant to leave her there to rot, but something kept him rooted. Maybe the quiet. Maybe the way the night wind hissed through the gaps in the boards like it was trying to speak. Finally, he muttered, "They want you gone come sunrise. I can't stop them." "You could try," she said. "Then I'd be buried next to Clara." The healer tilted her head. "You already are." He left her chained. But her words stayed, like burrs under his skin. Underscore 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 underscore. By morning, the crowd gathered again. Reverend Pike brought the rope, the same one they'd used before, the same one that had left its mark across her wrists. But when Miles stepped outside, Something inside him shifted. Maybe it was the smell of smoke still clinging to Clara's dress. Maybe it was the way the boy, his son, Eli, was standing barefoot in the dust, watching. Eli's eyes weren't angry like the rest. They were scared. Curious. And when the healer was dragged from the barn, Eli took one small step forward and said, "She prayed for Mama. I heard her." The crowd fell quiet. Just for a heartbeat. That silence, it cracked something. Not much. Just a hairline fracture in their certainty. But it was enough for Miles to speak. "She don't swing today," he said. His voice was low, gravel-thick. "If any man's got a quarrel, take it with me." The crowd hesitated. No one met his eye. No one moved. He cut her loose himself. The rope fell, leaving a pale ring around her wrist, a brand of mercy and shame both. "Get out of town," he muttered, "before they change their minds." She didn't thank him. She just touched her wrist and said, "When mercy costs you your place, Sheriff, that's when it's real." Then she vanished into the mesas, where even the coyotes wouldn't follow. Evil don't always ride in on a black horse. Sometimes, it rides in quiet, through breath and cough. A month passed. The rain dried, leaving the land cracked like an old man's hands. The people of Larkspur Bend went back to their gossip, their whiskey, their prayers, until the children began to fall sick. At first, they said it was just the heat. Then came the tremors, the fever that burned through the skin, the strange red blisters that rose like brands from inside. Within a week, 6 were dead. The town's doctor packed up and fled to Carson Creek, leaving behind a note that read, "May God forgive this place." Now it was the sheriff's turn to watch helplessly as the town coughed itself to ruin. He patrolled the street at dusk, watching men bury their kin in shallow graves. He heard the muttering again, words that crawled like snakes. "This is her curse. She warned us. The Indian woman brought this down." And in that moment, Sheriff Miles Evis realized something colder than guilt. They weren't just afraid of her, they missed her. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, he rode out past the old mines, past the dry creek, into the open mesas where shadows had no end. The moon was bone white, thin as a blade. He found her near a campfire, sitting cross-legged beside a pot of boiling herbs, the blackbird from before perched on a shoulder. She didn't look surprised. "You took your time," she said. Miles dismounted slowly, pulling his hat low. "The town's dying." "I know. You'll come back." "I was run out," she said, voice quiet but sharp. "Tied up. Branded with your rope. You think I'll walk back to save them?" He stared into the fire, jaw trembling. "I'll give you my badge if that's what it takes." The healer laughed, low, bitter, and tired. "Your badge is what made them believe they could hang me." Then, she reached for the pot and poured a thick, greenish brew into a tin cup. The scent was bitter, sage and bloodroot. "This'll help," she said. "But I'm not coming. You will." "Me?" "You'll mix it. You'll heal them." He frowned. "I ain't no healer." "Neither was I," she said softly, "until someone made me one." Underscore 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 underscore. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "When they ask who gave it to you, Sheriff," he stopped. "Tell them it was the woman they left to die." Her eyes caught the firelight, bright, ancient, steady. "And tell them it was mercy that saved them, not God." Underscore 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 underscore. Miles rode back through the night, clutching the cup like a relic. By dawn, he was in the church, mixing the brew into the town's water barrel. No one asked questions. They just drank, desperate. By evening, the fever began to break. The town survived. But the whisper spread faster than any sickness. The sheriff drank the witch's cure. And this time, they weren't sure if it was damnation or deliverance. When fear don't find a coffin, it starts looking for a body. For a while, it seemed Larkspur Bend might heal. The fever faded, children's laughter returned, and the church bell tolled again, this time for weddings, not funerals. But peace in that town never lasted long. A ranch hand named Boone Turner was the first to speak what others were thinking. He said the fever hadn't left. It had been stolen, traded for souls. He said the sheriff had made a pact with the witch, and the proof was the scar on her wrist, the mark of the rope that had failed to finish the job. By nightfall, the talk spread faster than any sickness. They said the healer had been seen again, walking along the ridge, her shawl dragging like a shadow. They said the sheriff still met her under the cliffs, that he'd gone heathen, that the rain whispered her name. By the third day, a group of men came to Miles Ever's door, drunk, armed, and holy with fear. Boone Turner stood in front. You gonna hand her over, sheriff? Or you plannin' to share her curse? Miles looked at their faces, men he'd shared whiskey with, men who'd buried his wife beside him. They didn't look human anymore. They looked hungry for something to blame. He didn't reach for his gun. He just said, if it's justice you want, you'll have to ride with me to get it. And before dawn, he saddled his horse and rode out toward the mesas again, knowing damn well what they intended. Underscore 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 underscore. They found her camp by the dry creek bed. The fire was dead, her satchel half packed. She didn't run when they came. She stood there, wind pulling her hair across her face, the blackbird circling above her head like a warning. Boone Turner spat in the dirt. Your medicine's done enough harm, witch. She didn't speak. She only looked at Miles, the man who'd once tied her wrists and now rode to her again. You told me mercy was real, he said quietly. Can it stand one more test? Her gaze softened just enough for pain to flicker through. Mercy don't mean silence, sheriff. Boone shoved her toward the waiting rope. Ain't no more trials. She swings now. Miles drew his gun. The click echoed like thunder. No one's haggin' nobody, he said. Not while I'm brayathin'. The standoff hung heavy in the air, like the storm that hadn't yet broken. Boone sneered. You'll die for her. Miles didn't blink. I already did. And then, from behind the men, came the sound of small feet. Eli. The boy had followed on his pony, barefoot and pale, clutching his mother's old shawl. He ran between his father and the mob, voice shaking but clear. She helped Mama, he cried. You all drink her cure. You all live cause of her. The men froze. The child's voice cracked the air like lightning, pure, sharp, impossible to ignore. Boone's hand faltered. The others stepped back. The healer looked at the boy, then at the sheriff. Looks like mercy found its voice. Miles lowered his gun. The wind carried the sound of it, soft, final. Underscore 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 underscore. By the time the men turned back toward town, the rope was gone, burned to ash. And in that ash, the healer pressed a palm, leaving a mark of soot across her wrist, covering the pale scar left by the town's hatred. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was survival. When a man breaks the law for the right reason, the law don't forgive him, but the land sometimes does. By morning, the mob was gone. The desert was quiet again, too quiet. The sheriff and the healer stood where the rope had burned, the ash still warm under their boots. Miles watched the horizon, knowing what came next. They'll strip me of the badge, he said. Maybe worse. She crouched beside the ashes, sifting through them with her fingers. "You can always bury a badge," she murmured. "It's harder to bury what it stands for." He thought about that for a long moment, the wind tugging at his coat. Then, without a word, he unpinned the star from his chest and dropped it into the dirt. The metal hissed against the hot ground, the engraved letters catching the sun one last time before he covered it with his boot. "I reckon the badge never saved anyone anyway," he said. "No," the healer said. "But the man might." Underscore 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 for a while. They lived on the outskirts of Larkspur Bend, her in her small canvas tent, him in a half-broken line shack with his boy. People didn't come near, but sometimes Miles found small things left by the creek, a jar of sugar, a loaf of bread, a baby's blanket. The town wasn't ready to say thank you, but maybe it was learning how to whisper it. He spent his days helping her gather roots, learning the smell of crushed willow bark and the sting of wild nettle. She taught him to listen, not just to words, but to silence. Sometimes, late at night, when Eli slept and the crickets hummed low, Miles would sit by her fire. She'd hum an old song in a language he didn't know, and he'd feel something loosen in his chest, like the land itself was exhaling through her voice. One night, he asked, "You ever miss your people?" She stared into the flames. "They're in the dirt now. I talk to them when I walk barefoot." He nodded, understanding in a way he couldn't explain. And for the first time since Clara's passing, Miles didn't feel like a man haunted. He felt like a man still breathing. Underscore 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 underscore. But the pace didn't last. Reverend Pike rode out one morning, his horse foaming, his Bible open in his trembling hand. "You've forsaken the Lord," he cried at Miles. "You consort with devils. This town is under a curse." Miles looked him in the eye, calm as the mesa behind him. Maybe the curse is men who can't tell mercy from sin. The Reverend raised his pistol. His hand shook. The healer didn't move. "Shoot if you must," she said softly. "But you'll only kill what little good's left in this place." The Reverend froze. His hand dropped. And when he rode back into town, he never spoke her name again. Underscore 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 underscore. By the next spring, the healer's tent was gone. In its place, a small garden grew, wild sage, red lilies, and white blossoms shaped like tiny stars. The townsfolk whispered that the Indian woman had turned to smoke and drifted into the canyons. Others said she'd gone north, where no one would remember her name. But every time a child fell sick, mothers still walked to the creek with buckets, drawing water that smelled faintly of sage. And each time they drank, the fever passed. Some truths don't stay buried. They bloom, slow, stubborn, and silent. Years slipped through Larkspur Bend like wind through dry grass. The mines closed, the saloon changed names, and the church bell rusted to a dull, voiceless shape. Sheriff Miles Evers grew old beneath that same willow where Clara slept, his badge still buried beneath the dirt. Eli grew tall. He had his father's quiet eyes and his mother's kindness, and something else the town couldn't name. When folks coughed or fevered, they came not to a doctor, but to him. He'd crush leaves between stones, boil roots, whisper soft prayers he'd never learned from any church. And somehow, his patients always healed. They called it luck at first, then providence. But those who remembered the woman by the creek knew better. underscore 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 one summer. Long after his father's death, Eli rode to the edge of the mesas. The land was empty now, or so they said. Yet as he dismounted and walked along the dry creek bed, he felt something under his boots, soft earth, damp in a place that hadn't seen rain in weeks. He knelt. The ground smelled faintly of sage. There, half hidden in the dirt, was a small stone carved with a mark, a spiral surrounded by 3 dots. The same mark that had once hung around her neck in that little pouch. The mark no one in town had ever understood. He turned the stone over. On the underside, scorched into its surface, was the faint impression of a rope, a circle burned deep but broken clean through at one point. A rope that would never bind again. Eli stood for a long time, listening to the wind. It wasn't whispering curses. It wasn't mourning. It just hummed, steady, low, alive. He planted the stone by the water's edge and covered it with soil. Then he poured from his canteen, letting the dirt darken. When he looked up, the blackbird was there. Older now, or maybe just another of its kind, perched on a mesquite branch, head tilted as if remembering. Eli smiled. She stayed, didn't she? The bird didn't answer. It didn't need to. By the next spring, that place bloomed again, bright red lilies and white star-shaped flowers stretching toward the sun. And when travelers passed through Larkspur Bend, they sometimes found themselves stopping there without knowing why. They'd feel the cool air, smell the sage, hear the hush of something that wasn't quite wind. And in that stillness, they'd swear they could hear a woman's voice, soft, unafraid, and free. Underscore 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 the old folks in town still tell her story by firelight. They say Mercy once wore a rope around its wrist. They say it burned that rope and made the desert bloom. And when the fire dies down, someone always asks, was she a witch or a saint? The storyteller just spits into the dust and says, depends on who you ask and how much of her medicine's still running through your veins. Then they fall quiet, staring into the embers, feeling something they can't quite name, something between guilt and grace. Because out here, under this endless western sky, some souls don't need saving. They just need to be believed. If this story stirred something quiet in you, saddle up with us. Subscribe, and ride along for the next tale beneath these same western stars.